الحضور الكريم، الزملاء الأعزاء، أرحب بكم في حلقة نقاشية جديدة من برنامج سيمنار المركز العربي. ويسعدني أن أقدم إليكم اليوم الدكتورة نادية البغدادي، التي سوف تقدم سيمنارها تحت عنوان الحيوات اللامركزية، السيرة الذاتية والتنقل وحدود الإمبراطورية. والدكتورة نادية البغدادي هي مؤرخة متخصصة في التاريخ الإسلامي الحديث والفكر والأدب والثقافة. تلقت تدريبا أكاديميا في جامعة برلين الحرة، حيث درست لاحقا، وشملت مراحل تكوينها الأكاديمي فترات بحثية طويلة في مصر وتونس ولبنان، لا سيما في الجامعة الأمريكية ببيروت. درست في أوروبا وأمريكا الشمالية والشرق الأوسط، وتدرس حاليا في برنامج الدراسات التاريخية في الجامعة المركزية الأوروبية في فيينا، وتشرف على أطروحات في مواضيع تشمل العلمانية والتحولات الثقافية والحركات الشعبية. وقد شاركت في تصميم ندوة بودابست فيينا، وهي ندوة قارنت بين الحواضر الإمبراطورية العثمانية والهابسبورغية خلال القرن التاسع عشر الطويل من منظور عابر للحدود، وتركز أبحاثها على هذا القرن ضمن أطر التاريخ العالمي. درست الدكتورة نادية البغدادي التحولات الثقافية والفكرية في مصر في سياق حركة النهضة وظهور أجناس أدبية جديدة، ومن بين اهتماماتها البحثية مسألة البنى والفاعلين في الحداثة العلمانية المتأخرة وحركة الإصلاح الإسلامي في المشرق العربي، والعلاقة بين الدين والنوع الاجتماعي والحداثة. تتمحور أبحاثها حول مسارين متداخلين: التوتر بين الدين والعلماني في تشكل المسارات الفكرية والاجتماعية، وظهور ثقافة الطباعة في شرق البحر الأبيض المتوسط بخصوصياتها المتأخرة. لها العديد من المؤلفات في قضايا عديدة، من بينها النوع الاجتماعي، وفيما يتعلق بالكاتبات العراقيات في المنفى، وتحول المعايير الأخلاقية والجندرية في منتصف القرن التاسع عشر. تقدم الدكتورة نادية البغدادي محاضرتها في حدود فيما لا يتجاوز 40 دقيقة، ثم تعقب عليها الدكتورة أمل غزال، المؤرخة وعميدة كلية العلوم الاجتماعية والإنسانية في معهد الدوحة للدراسات العليا، فيما لا يتجاوز 15 دقيقة. دكتورة نادية.
Thank you, first of all, for letting me speak in English. I very much appreciate this. It's a very special honor to speak at the ACRPS seminar, and I'm very grateful for and the privilege to present a work in progress that I'm conducting to a large extent on my own, and to some extent this project also with a colleague of mine whom I will reference as I move on. I want to thank, and I should not miss thanking, in particular Dr. Issam and Dr. Hani, who, because we've tried a couple of times to have a seminar happening, but then COVID came and post-COVID, and things got a little bit complicated. So I'm very happy that finally it did materialize. And I want to thank very much Dean Amal Razal for being the discussant of what I am presenting and what I hope to receive your critical comments on. As it is work in progress, there is an opportunity to move on and correct what may not be yet in place. So this is a very special opportunity for me indeed. I would like to also make one connection, since it finally is taking place, this seminar, that I just attended another workshop that is organized by by the university, and that is also on Ottoman Empire and biographies, namely the Yusuf al-Adima project, which had its meeting in Istanbul, and where we see that from a very different angle, namely with the center central focus being really on the biography of a person, namely the hero, or wasn't he a hero, of Yusuf al-Admir, but also seeing how we see and how we have to understand the confluence of the deeds and working and itineraries of an individual, in this case a very relevant Ottoman officer individuals, and the confluences of imperial and colonial powers. My take today will be exactly from the other side. It is also a focus, as the title indicates, decentering empire, on biography, on individual itineraries, but trying to locate them, as the title suggests, within a context, decentering empire, where the Muslim Mediterranean, as we call it, is not only the confining and the defining space in which people moved, but is also providing conflict and power, structural and conjunctural elements that define the very biographical itineraries and presences. So what I am presenting then in these 35, 40 minutes today is, as I said, work in progress, and which was triggered by actually two projects, or from two angles. One is what you received, the material for the seminar. I briefly put this on again for those who had the opportunity to read it. It is a chapter that is going to be published by the end of this year, I hope, finally, and which had been the major trigger for me to move into this direction. I also shared with you, this is number 3, the book proposal for the edited volume on decentering empire, which was accepted as a proposal with the abstracts of 12 chapters by Brill de Gruyter, and which we expect to, hopefully, inshallah, submit next year, early next year, for publication. And I submitted as well only the abstract of what will become my own chapter, Eccentric Lives, Biography, Mobility, and the Limits of Imperial Boundaries. This is for those who had an opportunity to look at the material, what I had submitted. If you haven't had the chance to read it, I think the presentation will catch up sufficiently to put you in the place. Let me start briefly then with the Decentering Empire book and what triggered this new project. As we expect with my colleague and myself that we are opening, hopefully, a space in which we will trace a new field within historical studies. It is one that one of the triggers, mobility of individuals within the borders of empire and beyond, obviously in topic, as I see also you at the center are dealing with this in various ways, is the topic of the day, right? We would think mobility is something that is a 21st century phenomenon, but clearly and certainly it is not, as some of the scholars who are writing now say mobility is there from the beginning of all human history. We are not taking that big perspective, but it is indeed for the 18th, 19th century a major feature that defines historical movement in the region. But then mobility usually comes with a very positive spin, right? Mobility, people, we're thinking of social mobility, we're thinking of mobility in positive terms. It is a concept that is loaded with positive connotations. But of course, mobility in the first place is also, and we are seeing this as well today, mobility which arises or is triggered by conflict. Right, mobility less as a moment or as an idea of self-fulfillment. I go where I find better conditions, but it is also and has to be seen, and this is what we are trying to capture in our project, mobility and conflict as mutually reinforcing modes. Connected to this is, and this is the third aspect, apologies, of this project, is then circulation of ideas. Those who had the possibility to read the chapter that I had sent around, this is all about acknowledged and unacknowledged, open and evidenced, as well as in undisclosed circulation of ideas. Ideas as they appear, and we are here in the 19th century, that appear in print, right, with the emergence of print, but that appear also, we have this very long continuation of manuscript cultures of ideas that are kept with intent or unintended under the surface or under the radar of registration of circulation. The fourth element, what we are focusing on in the project and in the book, is the authority of institutions and power. So decentering empire has or is traditionally being viewed from centers of power, be it the high sublime port in Istanbul, right, as the authority with its provincial authorities, authority of institutions that translate from the military to other forms of control that translate into the regional peripheries. And we try to show in the volume that this relationship of authority of institutions that is usually seen for that period that we are studying here as a top-down one needs to be reconsidered and needs to be reshuffled by way of seeing how we have also other forces of authority. I'm not speaking now of the provincial notables per se as an office, but as elements of authority that are acknowledged or unacknowledged, also partaking in institutions. I will speak more to this as we go along. I'm just highlighting here the elements that, or the entries that structure our book. Ambiguity. Why am I emphasizing ambiguity? Ambiguity, this is part of the chapter that I have circulated. Ambiguity, we thought, is important here for decentering empire, because the narratives that we have at hand on intellectual history of the long 19th century is basically seen in terms of a very clear, straightforward development in very simple terms, from the first precursors of the Nahda until then proto-nationalist thinkers, or depending which line of interest you have, very clear developments, very often seen as copies, or seeing as imitation, or seeing as response to models that are out there, usually the Western model. Ambiguity for us here is a way, and this is where the biographical comes in, to follow lines of intellectual history that don't sit easily with this Nahda and development, westernization projects. Then, in order to show this, we put a great stress on trans-imperial networks. There's a growing body of literature emerging in historical studies that focuses not only on networks, let's say in Beirut or Damascus or in Istanbul or Tunis, in the imperial capitals themselves, but that the trans-imperial networks, that is to say, networks that not only connect cities with each other, but that also are driven and derive their impetus from other imperial contexts, are allowing us to understand a figure like the one that I have sent to you, Fares Ashidiak, who operated in different imperial contexts, and this trans-imperial network, and in our volume we'll have several literatures and chapters on it, is really helping us to not only decenter empire, but to see a much richer sociocultural history of the region. And then finally, margins and marginality. As we all know, in the 19th century, this has been, this is not a privilege to our contemporary modern era, sectarianism, religious determinism, not only between the major monotheistic religions, but inside Christian and other denominations, margins and marginality has been seen as a driving force, right? So the theory often goes that marginalized people are prompted to be exceptional people, or being people with great, because of their marginal status, being driven to excel, as being driven to venture into areas that their marginality usually would not permit. And this is where we see the decentering of empire, decentering empire, finding a strong resource that it is people who had been indeed, like the person I will be speaking in a second about, Abdelkader, but also people like the other kind of emblematic person, Shidiak figure, that margins and marginality are one of the lenses through which we can understand how we can and could not only decenter empire, but look and rethink the dynamics between center and periphery, right? So these are the main venues of theoretical, conceptual approaches we are taking in order to evidence, to document this, what we call decentering. Just very briefly, you all know, of course, how the Mediterranean looks like, but since we are here at the Gulf, I thought, oops, I can't go back, can only go forward. Okay.
You can.
Doesn't want it to. Well, it jumps. Doesn't matter. You saw the map. Sorry, it doesn't follow my command. Okay.
Yeah, you can use
These ones here.
Yeah. The atlas.
Then with this? No. Why? Sorry.
Just click to the. You want to show the map? The map, yeah.
Yes.
Just click.
Just click on this. Yeah. But it doesn't, you see? Okay. Good. So just to show you what the region is. So we are indeed, there it is, in large. We are really trying and are covering with the material that we have not only the Eastern Mediterranean, but indeed the imperial limits of the Ottoman Empire do end towards the west, but we have nevertheless a very strong North African impact here, but also, and this is why I took this map, I could have taken any other, there is no specific reason for this one, how it is connected indeed also to the world of Europe, which is part here of our project. So I sent you the text, and I will speak also briefly about it on Fares Ashidiak. But the other trigger for the project has been indeed this gentleman. I think you can recognize him. This is Abdelkader, right? Who has seen a huge revival in museum exhibitions, in biographies, and the biographical turn that has taking him at center stage. And the project from where our decentering empire emerges has been or is rooted in a project that is trying to relocate Abdelkader in his time through his biography, but not turning him as what we'll see in many presentations of the hero in the desert, but as a figure. There has been an important exhibition in Marseille in 2022 depicting him as an alternative hero, an emir of resistance, a holy fighter, founder of the Algerian state, precursor of the codification of modern humanitarian law, a warrior, a statesman, an apostle, you name it, several epithets that often, and as this is taken from the catalogue, often impressive but also contradictory. We've all heard about him, but do we know enough about him? So the museum in Marseille, the exhibition very much focused on his reception within the northern parts of the Mediterranean Sea, to document that he has had impact. But as we know, of course, there is much more to say. And we have from our Arabic sources, of course, much more to show as well. So in an exhibition like this, with the biographical turn, the emphasis has been to show him, to put him out as an exemplary life. And there I could now show you several books that came out that depict him. Bruno Etienne, right, who shows Abdelkader as the hero. It's a book that depicts him as a very exceptional one. It's a modern hagiography of persons. We have a counter biography by Thierry Zarcon on unveiling the other side of a life, namely the mysterious and secret lives of Abdelkader. And so this is a multi-layeredness and complexity, and it has been really amazing how many works there have been published on him. A man who is still much less known and who captures my interest much more is somebody where we're not even really aware of what is his date of birth. We have in the authoritative literature various dates given. The only thing we know is, there is a number missing. It's of course 87, not 80. Sorry, in Kadıköy in Istanbul, but buried then later back in Lebanon, carried and transported on an Austrian Habsburg navy that upon his will brought him back home and closed the circle. So the chapter that you received from me on ambiguity, disguise, and evidence as a leitmotif on Fares Ashidiak is what gave me and us for this project the reason to try to go beyond intellectual history per se, but using intellectual history to understand him. So the text that you received, I shall briefly speak about it and then move again back to the project. The text that you received, the chapter, is basically less a biography of a man, but a biography of a text, right? It is on the Mumahakat Ta'wil, which was never published, which is a text in circulation as a manuscript. And there is a reason for this, why this manuscript, which exposes fundamental religious critique within the Christian church and Christian scholarship and theology, is a text that at that time obviously could not dare seeing the light of printing. Right? There is a need of disguise, both politically in terms of the persecution in the 19th century in Mount Lebanon, famously so. This is where Fares Ashidiak comes from, but not restricted to this, that certain critiques obviously could take place, obviously were written, but were not possible to circulate or see the date. The question that I'm asking in that chapter is, whether Al-Shidyaq's itinerary, and let me remind those of you who are not so familiar with the person or with his story, is that born in Lebanon, actually really in the mountains, growing up in Beirut, has a tremendous itinerary due to threats to his work, due to wishes to go, as many of us do today, and I think I don't know how many students are here in this room now, but that we go where we think we can learn something, right? So we are all migrants of knowledge and for knowledge production. So was he. So his itinerary and life took him indeed to several places around the Mediterranean, from Tunis to Malta, back and forth. Before he'd been for several years in Egypt upon invitation of the Khedive. From Tunis he went, and Malta later went on to Paris, and England had been called then to the very center and holy of political power, namely to the Sublime Porte in Istanbul, to oversee the official gazette of publishing, right, and where he has been most influential in various ways, but of the various ways we don't know so much. I'm trying to trace a little bit in this chapter, and where he stayed from the late 50s till the rest of his life in an important position as being both, we call this a broker, right, a broker of connections, of networks, but also being able to use his position there in the center and nevertheless being marginal as an Arab in Istanbul with reduced reception back in the Arab lands, but we don't know yet how deep really the reception was, right? So this man, and this is what the chapter tries to show, has been connected to several centers of learning. In Paris, as I said, in England, he was in Cambridge, in London, he had been placed with important figures, scholarly figures of his time, and the question that I'm asking then is this itinerary that he chose, which retrospect makes me enamored with him as a scholar, right, has produced fantastic, critical, very non-conformist work, whether this actually is his own choice or simply a will of misfortune of an unemployable man. Again, a story we all know in one way or the other, right? Not so much a 19th century life. Or does it tell us his way, with his critical, non-conformist way, actually about the structural condition of center and periphery, both spatially and politically, of the long 19th Ottoman century? So this is, these are the kind of questions that are driving our book. In concrete terms, I sent just the abstract of my chapter that I'm producing here, is bringing together, as you see, calling it an, English is nice for this, an eccentric life, right? I mean, by calling it eccentric, you still see the connection with the center, but it is outside. So an eccentric life, it's about mobility and biography and indeed the limits of imperial boundaries. Because what we are seeing here in this very life with imperial boundaries, it is transgressing not only the Ottoman and the Arab provinces, but it is also transgressing into the French and the British colonial powers to come or to be. And what I'm asking here is then, when and where does imperial dominance over individual persons and political actors end? How do imperial centers and peripheries resurface in individual itineraries? And very quickly, to go through this, I don't want to go in detail through this, it's through selected ego documents. This is how we are calling today the large number of texts written, produced by individuals that are not necessarily autobiographic or others, so ego documents and biographical data of leading intellectual thinkers from the Mashreq, employing a micro-historical perspective, which may seem at odds at first sight when you hear us speaking about decentering empire and looking at structural, conjunctural conditions. And if you remember what are my slide from the my second slide that I showed you, how does microhistory fit in it? It precisely fits in it as it connects us with the biographical, right? The microhistorical perspective very nicely allows us to bring in the biographical without getting lost into a life as such. And what we ask finally, or what I'm asking finally, is how spatial proximity to or distance from variant centers of authority and changing scales of rule, colonial, local, or imperial, bear on the constitution as subjects in a semi-colonial context. So this is a frame for the chapter that is going to come out of it, and I don't need to go through this. So what has been then in terms of methodology, what we are doing is really what we call also scaling empire. We didn't use that term. It is almost as good as decentering empire. Scaling empire allows us to ask these questions. Are imperial boundaries limiting boundaries? What is the quality of particular kind of biography as a source and as a genre, right? As a source, that is to say, to evidence the life of a particular person, but what does it do as a genre? Eccentric lives and scaling empire is also about spatial qualities, and it is, and this is why we went for the term decentering empire, because it resonates better. It allows us to look outside norm and normativity. This connects to what I said a few minutes ago, that many of the figures that we are dealing with are actually not coming from the center close, but are coming from the margins, or being a marginalized social group, and have the capacity to intendedly or unintendedly question norms and normativity. And this is then again, just to come back to one of the slides here, outside in. Is it the power of empire and center that allows us to write intellectual biography in a different way than we used to do? So are these agents of change, or are these only biographical? Is eccentric lives, do they draw on taxonomies and registers of the national and regional, and bring back again biography and nation? And just to show you one, in passing, a fantastic model where on one person something similar had been tried is Christine Filiou's book. You may be familiar with it, Biography of an Empire. Right? It's called Biography of an Empire, but it's not the biography of an empire. It's the biography only of one person, Stephanos Vogoridis, I hope I pronounce this properly, where she takes the perspective, conceptually, that he is pars pro toto, that his life is actually exemplary for all Greek Ottomans at the period. So this is why she can call it Biography of an Empire governing Ottomans in an age of revolution. We are a little bit doubtful about such an approach, but it has had a tremendous impact, this book, in the field, and this is why we're taking it to show. Also, I see I need to have only a few minutes left, 5 minutes left probably. Right, Tom? You still have him? Good. To say that this is decentering empire. My colleague and me, we are all working on male figures. We have male protagonists in our work, but that doesn't mean that there have not also been others. And that we are, I thought at least I should briefly show you Zainab al-Fawwar's very important book, which is on the Kitab al-Zur al-Mansur, fi Tabakat Rabat al-Khudur, which is or had been a very important book. This collects 430 biographies And the important thing, biographies not only of the famous women, but she actually asked for contribution. She asked people to suggest who should appear in such a biography. And as you know, the genre of these biographies in Arabic and Islamic tradition is a strong one, right? It is certainly not a new genre, but it has a long genealogy. And this book, there is a beautiful, actually monograph on it written by Marilyn Booth in 2015 or so, where she devotes a whole monograph only on Zainab Fawaz and this dictionary. So there are then two positions. Again, coming back to the methodology, and you will ask, oh my God, what are they doing? They speak about decentering empires and doing this through biographies. What can we really do with biographies? And there are the two positions which I think are still present today. The one, I'm starting with the right one by Hannelore Schlaffer. I could have taken any other scholar who holds a similar view, saying biography confirms a farewell to theory. Right? This is why you can never, I don't know if there are PhD students here, you can never submit a biography as a PhD thesis because it's considered not to be a proper scholarly work. Right? It's a farewell to theory. The biographer thus escapes the socio-historical, political, and politico-economic analysis on which in earlier times his awareness of method was founded. So this is still a very strong view, right, that a biography, and I don't know if anybody here is interested in biographies, is not a good guarantee for you to make a career, certainly not in academia. You can do this when you've reached your biographical age, maybe that allows you to do what you want, but for qualification, this is not what you should do. But there's, of course, also that other position, and that is our position that we are taking, that, and I took now somebody from the 19th century, Thomas Carlyle, on heroes, since I had Abdelkader, and I'm working on somebody like Chidiak, who is a non-hero hero, saying that history of what man has accomplished in the world is at the bottom of history of the great men who have worked there. They were the leaders, etc., and they give away to the general mass of men contrived in what they can do and attain. So this view would say it is precisely through biographies that you actually get close to structure. What many of us do, right, who work on structural history, economic history, whatever, will never be able to catch how really the social systems, the political systems work. How do people as individuals react to this? And I spare you Karl Marx. I thought it would give you this, but you can briefly read this for your own. But this, again, this 19th century mode, men make their own history, but not as they please in conditions of their own choice, but rather under those directly encountered, given, and inherited. And this, again, brings us actually close. I wouldn't say we have a Marxist project, but actually it's a very concise, typically for Karl Marx, very elegantly put definition that is not so very far from what we are doing, albeit with a different topic. So just to summarize then what we are doing in the volume, or in that project, it's becoming a bit bigger than a volume per se, is that, and here you see also the name of my colleague with whom I'm doing it, and she's just as much engaged as I am, at Professor Bettina Dennerlein. And I summarized for you here what are for us the major advantages of this approach, namely to bring together not only the biographical turn about which I spoke now, but also this imperial turn, the imperial turn which we've seen prompted by post-colonial studies in the first place, right, to see history through the lens no longer of nation states, but indeed through the imperial structures which allow us to see greater nuances in the imperial, that is, approach, nuances between different levels and hierarchies of authority in terms of political structure, but as well as of center and peripheries. I think I mentioned this, I don't need to repeat this. For those of you who haven't looked at the material we sent around, the accepted proposal with our longish introduction of the argument why we want to do the book here, you can briefly look at. I'm not going to read this out to you. What are the chapters we have had so far and that are giving the structure of the book, the 3 parts. And I'm very happy, and I should mention this since I will get now my critique from Dr. Amal, is that we've just solicited 2 more chapters. We are very proud to have them with us, also Michael Provence and Amal Razal, and I'm sure that in her comments she may want also to reference where we are wrong and where we are maybe not so bad. So again, the imperial turn, just let me make that, because I know that in, especially in some contexts here and in the field of Middle Eastern studies, this has gone very big and I would say sometimes wild, the imperial turn. This vast production, right, of post-colonial studies, it's a new geopolitics that tries to link the local with the global, which is indeed a challenge. We haven't spelled this out in our proposal ourselves, but of course local is their global, that is exactly what it is, but with our emphasis on micro-historical perspectives as well, it is implicitly contributing to these new discussions. But it also had been, and this is what had been so important, I think, with the imperial turn, is that it offers an alternative to the nation-state focus, which is still very strong in Arab scholarship, right? The nation-state as ultimately the culmination of political, social, other developments. This is a way out without reducing the relevance and the importance of this, but putting it on another scale. And it allows us, with what the imperial term has done in scholarship, and from which we pick some of the elements, is indeed that it has changed notions of culture, that cultures are not produced by spaces per se and are unchangeable, but the imperial term has also led to a much richer understanding of how cultures function, of multiculturalism, precisely in imperial context, the pluralism of languages, legal pluralisms, new visions of belonging, all of this, which is a richness as well from that comes with, or that came with the imperial turn, but from where we really take only, I think, I hope it became clear in what I laid out of how we are approaching the decentering, only picking some of the elements without subscribing, and this is why the term of colonial, post-colonial very rarely appears in our context, because we think we should move now to another stage without ignoring what the imperial turn and post-colonial studies have done. I have a bit more, but I want to close with one, I think for a number of reasons, very, very relevant reference, and that will be my last. One of the biographies that Edward Said's Out of Place, right, is in itself has become a cult status, right? The book, I think everybody has read it, and even those who haven't read it know what it is about. It has gained cult status because he's being indeed a chronicler of his own life, displaced and in a country lost. And when we say this of the time of Edward Said, this is all the more true if we look at it, of course, today and the catastrophe that is taking place. So it resonates what he does and what he says, and I couldn't resist closing with this. He says, this is the very last sentence in his Out of Place book. And it connects, I hope, to what I said in the beginning, that skepticism, too, is one of the themes I particularly want to hold on to. With so many dissonances in my life, I have learned actually to prefer being not quite right and out of place. Right? This is the last sentence of this, the closing sentence of the monograph of this book, the monograph, and the autobiography in which he speaks, and he explicitly says so that he wrote this at a particular bleak time in Palestinian history, after the armed resistance movement had been decisively defeated in Lebanon in 1982, and before the unprecedented popular resistance of the First Intifada in 1987. And he closes this then, and this is taken from another text, where he says, "For where no straight lines leads from home to birthplace, to school to maturity, all events are accidents, all progress is a digression, and all residence is exile." And I think that, again, he puts it much more aptly than I ever could have put it, but it connects indeed and brings to the forefront something that through the lens of the biography we can try to spell out, and that is our task as historians, to explain, nevertheless, interpret the ambiguities of individuals and collectivities, and the conjunctural and the structural. And I thank you for your attendance.
شكرا جزيلا دكتورة نادية البغدادي على هذا السيمنار وعلى هذا العرض. والآن ننتقل إلى المعقبة الدكتورة أمل غزال، التي سوف تناقش ورقة سيمنار الدكتورة نادية فيما لا يتجاوز 15 دقيقة.
طلع بده ساعة الموضوع مش ربع ساعة. Thank you, Dr. Nadia. You've made my job very difficult now. There's so much to respond to. As we agreed, I'm going to comment in Arabic mostly. والتعليق أنا بنيته على الورقة اللي اجتنا، وبعدين أنا والدكتورة نادية تكلمنا إنه رح أخذ نوتس وهي عم تعطي المحاضرة، لأنه ما كان عندي المعلومات نفسها، ورح أحاول أعلق على بعض النقاط. وعلى فكرة ما اختاروني لأني لبنانية أعلق على الشدياق، ما دخلني بالموضوع. يرتبط التحليل في هذه الورقة بشكل مباشر أو غير مباشر بعدة محاور متعلقة بما يعرف بالقرن التاسع عشر الطويل في السياق العثماني، والتطورات التي شكلت هوية تلك الفترة واهتم بها المؤرخون، حتى أصبحت هذه المحاور هي أعمدة استغرافيا التاريخ العربي العثماني في القرن التاسع عشر، وكذلك أعمدة تاريخ الفكر العربي تحديدا في تلك الفترة، وهو فكر عربي عثماني ببيئته وتفاعلاته ومحاوره. المحاور متداخلة، ومن باب الإيجاز ألخصها كالتالي: التنظيمات وتبعاتها الاجتماعية والسياسية والاقتصادية، التحولات في مفهوم ووظيفة الإمبراطورية. وهون لست متأكدة بأن ما أعني واضحا باللغة العربية، يعني لما كنت أفكر بالموضوع وعم بدي أقول إمباير، طبعا تلقائيا اجت كلمة إمبراطورية كالترجمة، بس حسيت إنه لا، يعني هي أكيد كلمة تانية، لأنه اللي قصدي فيه اللي معود على القراءات النقدية عن الإمباير بالإنجليزي صار تاني كلمة إمباير بحد ذاتها بدون ما نفسر فيها كتير شيء، يعني شيء كتير كريتيكال بدنا نتعامل معه بهذه الطريقة. فأنا يعني هون استخدام مصطلح إمبراطورية هو استخدام بشكل نقدي، يعني التحديث والحداثة كمحور، ثورة الطباعة والنشر والمواصلات، وأعتقد يعني هي متصلة بشكل أساسي بموضوع الموبيليتي، التنقل التي ذكرتي، والنهضة كإطار مفاهيمي وتحليلي لتحولات فكرية في المقاطعات العربية، متصلة أيضا طبعا بواقع وإفرازات التنظيمات العثمانية. وقد ارتبط تحليل الفكر العربي منذ منتصف القرن التاسع عشر بتفاعله مع هذه الأطر أو المحاور وتأثره بها وتأثيره عليها. شكلت هذه المحاور سلسلة فكرية، يعني أقصد هون intellectual genealogy intellectual chain في التقليد الأكاديمي الإنجلوفوني. مركزيتها كما نعرف هو كتاب البث حوراني الذي يعامل ككومبيديوم للفكر العربي. ورقة اليوم ترتكز على هذا الإرث الإنجلوفوني فيما يتعلق بالفكر العربي، وذلك بنقد كتاب البث حوراني، والذي سبق وانتقدته هنا في هذا السيمنار من زاوية أيضا ما أغفل وما أهمل. فتعيد الورقة عن فارس الشدياق مكانته التي لم يدركها البث حوراني. بالطبع لم يكن الشدياق الوحيد المهمش، ولكن أهمية تهميشه تأتي من أهمية أعماله. صحيح أن حوراني لم يعطي فارس الشدياق حقه كما لم يعطي غيره حقهم، ولكن مؤخرا وكما ذكرت الدكتورة نادية في ورقتها أعيد الاعتبار للشدياق وبرزت مكانته في دراسات الفكر العربي وفكر النهضة، إن كان في عمل عزيز العظم وفواز طرابلسي، وأيضا في مقال طرابلسي في كتابه الذي أو في كتاب Arabic Thought Beyond the Liberal Age، أو عمل طارق العريس، أو حتى مقالة لإلهام خوري مقدسي عن الشدياق. تكشف الورقة نقاب عن أعمال فارس الشدياق كانت مخفية، وتبحث في مضمونها وسياقاتها، وأيضا في رمزية عدم ظهور أو تداول تلك المؤلفات في عصرها. ويمثل هذا الموضوع محورا نقديا يتجلى فيما تسميه نادية البغدادي ثنائية، سأترجمها الدليل والغموض أو الدليل والارتباك، لست متأكدة يعني ما هو الأفضل. والورقة محاولة لتفسير هذه الثنائية التي تعيدها نادية البغدادي لمجموعة عوامل متداخلة، منها شخصي ومنها سياسي. عندما قرأت هذه المقاربة للشدياق استرجعت تلقائيا كيف تعامل طارق العريس مع الشدياق في كتابه Trials of Modernity، ولو كانت المنهجيات والأدوات مختلفة. يخلص العريس هنا إلى حجة مفادها أن الحداثة العربية هي سلسلة من اللقاءات أو المواجهات والارتباكات، محذرا من فهمنا للحداثة كتطور مضطرد نحو التنوير، مقترحا الحداثة كسلسلة أحداث من التفاعلات والاضطرابات والقلق تولدت من التشابك مع الحداثة وتمثلت بأبعاد جسدية وعاطفية. ترسم نادية البغدادي صورة للشدياق فيها أيضا ما يمكن أن نفهمه كتذبذب واضطراب وغموض في التعامل مع الحداثة، يمثل برأيي واقع الحداثة نفسها في القرن التاسع عشر في السياق العثماني بشكل عام والعربي العثماني بشكل خاص، يعني فيما يتعلق بالتعامل مع الحداثة. وبالمناسبة ما هو مثير للاهتمام هو أن طارق العريس أيضا وفواز طرابلسي وإلهام خوري مقدسي جميعا يحذرون من قراءة الفكر العربي في عصر النهضة وتشابكه مع الحداثة بشكل خطي مضطرد. هنا أود أن أسأل دكتورة نادية سؤال يتعلق بموضوع الحداثة، إذ هناك إشارات في النص إلى الحداثة والحداثة العربية تحديدا دون جعلها نقطة ارتكاز تحليلي لفهم سياق الشدياق، وكذلك ما من ذكر بشكل مباشر للتنظيمات ولو أنها حاضرة بوصف آخر في الورقة. طبعا أتكلم هنا ليس عن غياب الكلمة بحد ذاتها، وإنما عن غياب الإطار التحليلي الذي يربط الشدياق بسياق التنظيمات وبسياق الحداثة. وما يهمني هنا هو إمكانية فك السياق عنهما عن التنظيمات والحداثة إبستمولوجيا. ويأتي تساؤلي نابعا من مسألة الغموض التي تتكلم الورقة عنه، وأتساءل إن لم تكن الحالة كلها حينها مصبوغة بالغموض، يعني ليس فقط موضوع شخص معين، الظروف كلها. يعني ما أحاول أن أقوله أني ما أرى عند الشدياق من غموض وتأرجح كانت سمة عصره وتقلباته، وهو ميزة التنظيمات وإفرازاتها أيضا. وربما أيضا تأتي ثنائية الدليل والغموض كآلة لضبط توقعاتنا بالالتزام الفكري والإيديولوجي من المفكرين، لربما. ولربما الثابت الوحيد لدى الشدياق كان الالتزام بفكرة الإصلاح والمشروع الإصلاحي، ولكن كان هذا عبارة، يعني الإصلاح كان عبارة عن طيف سبيكتروم يتأرجح هو بين أطرافه، شأنه كشأن غيره فيما يسمى القرن التاسع عشر الطويل. ولربما الصدمة أتت هي جزء من هذا التأرجح، وهذا ما حصل في موقفه من المرأة مثلا، تغيرات في موقفه من هذا الموضوع. يعني أنا أحاول أن أربط الآن بين مواضيع أخرى ذكرتيها في المحاضرة. طيب، يعني من ناحية أعتقد أنه يجب أن نعترف بمحدودية السيرة في التحليل التاريخي رغم أهمية السير، رغم أهمية البيوغرافي لنا كمؤرخين في عملية التاريخ، وهي طبعا مرآة للمجتمع الأوسع وتغيرات وظواهر أكبر. ولكن نعترف بأن بعض السير تحوي أبعادا يعصى علينا حتى أحيانا إدراكها أو تحليلها أو الصبر فيها، خاصة عندما تحتوي على عناصر خاصة أو شخصية، أو لربما أحيانا نجنح لتحميل المثقفين والمفكرين تحميلهم أكثر مما يتحملون ونهمل أبعادا إنسانية. سأعطي مثالا. عندما كنت أبحث عن سليمان الباروني وأكتب عنه، وجدت وثيقة في الأرشيف البريطاني عبارة عن خطاب أرسله للسلطات الفرنسية خلال الحرب العالمية الثانية يطلب منهم السماح له بالعودة إلى تونس مقابل أن يساندهم في حربهم ضد إيطاليا. الوثيقة كانت غير عادية وتقريبا يعني صدمة. الباروني أبعد عن شمال أفريقيا من قبل السلطات الفرنسية، وأبعد عن فرنسا أيضا من قبل الفرنسيين، وكذلك بعدته السلطات البريطانية عن مصر والعراق، وبعد وساطات السلطان العماني سمح له باللجوء إلى عمان. عقدان من الزمن في عمان انتقل خلالهما من العمل مع الإمام ثم مع السلطان، صار على الملاريا هو وأفراد أسرته، وبقي يتنقل بين مسقط وبغداد. حياة في المنفى سببها الإمباير، سببها فرنسا وبريطانيا. رد الفرنسيون عليه لاحقا، ردوا أو بعثوا برد للبريطانيين يطلبون أن يسهلوا عودة الباروني إلى الجزائر. كيف للباروني ما يعرف كان يعني بالمجاهد المنفي أن يعطي هذا الالتزام لفرنسا؟ يعني من ناحية إيديولوجية فكرية things don't make sense كما نقول. ولكن وهذا لم يكن تذبذب في الموقف من الاستعمار، ولكنه كان المنفى والمرض والابتعاد عن الوطن، وهذا له أبعاد شخصية وليس أبعاد يعني فكرية. هلأ توقفت حول ملاحظاتك عن حالة المنفى أو ما تسميه أيضا نصف المنفى السيمي إكزايل، وأنها كانت ربما سببا في عدم قدرة الشدياق على الاستقرار وبناء شبكة علاقات محلية، وهي ملاحظات مهمة، خاصة أن حالة النفي الطوعي أو القسري ازداد في منتصف القرن التاسع عشر، تسارع في أواخره وتكثف مع انتهاء حكم الدولة العثمانية والاحتلال البريطاني أو الفرنسي للمقاطعات العربية. وهذا الموضوع لم يحظى على فكرة بعد بالتدقيق، وأظن الكتاب سيسد ثغرة كبيرة في هذا الموضوع، خاصة أن جزءا لا بأس به من المثقفين العرب مروا بتجربة المنفى وكتبوا من المنفى. وحالة النفي برأيي نفسها مرآة لتلك العلاقة بين السيرة الفردية وبين الإمبراطورية والدول والحدود البورس بوردرز المسامية بين يعني الحدود المسامية بين إن كان يعني نتكلم في نطاق الإمبراطوريات أو في نطاق الدول. لي نظرة مختلفة لمسألة النفي والترانس إمبيريال نتوركس. أنا أعتقد بأنه المنفيين هم من شكلوا يعني أعمدة للشبكات الفكرية، لأن كانت الشبكات الفكرية تتوسع مع النفي لم تكن تصغر. كلما نفي مفكر أو مثقف كلما توسعت الشبكة، وكلما أيضا يعني أعطي هذا المنفي مجالا أكبر للمساهمة الفكرية، لأنه ابتعد عن لربما ما تسميه السنتر. أنا برأيي طبعا في المجال الذي تبحثين فيه يجب يعني هي مسألة سنترز وليس سنتر واحد، يعني أو ليس المسألة سنتر وبريفريز. نحن في حالة خاصة مع ما قلت سهولة التنقل، سهولة النشر، توسع الشبكات الفكرية والسياسية، لربما المنهج الأفضل هو النظر إلى ما كان يسمى البريفريز أصبحت سنترز إضافية لما كان يفهم باعتبار هو السنتر. كما قلت يعني أنا أعطي هذه الملاحظات بشكل عفوي على بعض الأمور التي ذكرتيها في العرض. وعند انتهائي من قراءة المقال استرجعت عمل فريدريك كوبر Tensions of Empire Colonial Cultures in a Bourgeois World، والحجج التي يقدمها، ورأيت تشابها بين الحالتين، يعني الحالات التي يتعامل مع هذا الكتاب وحالة الشدياق من حيث يعني المخرجات. من أهم ما وصل إليه كوبر وآن ستولر هو ما يحدث ضمن إطار الإمبراطورية من تناقضات وتجاذبات، فلا ننسى أن الشدياق كان يتنقل بين هذه التناقضات بشكل مستمر. وأسأل هنا سؤال أيضا، يعني عندما قارنت بين عملك وبين ما يقوله فريدريك كوبر وآن ستولر عن البرجوازية القلقة، يعني هل كان هذا ما نراه عند الشدياق حالة برجوازية قلقة أيضا؟ لا أظن ما ذكره فريدريك كوبر في كتابه تم تحليله على مستوى يعني اللونج 19th century بالمقاطعة العربية. يعني في هناك تشكل لنوع من البرجوازية الفكرية في حالة قلقة دائما. نقطة ما بعد ما دقيقتين. أوكي. كمان يعني تذكرت نقطة أخرى عندما قرأت المقال عن الشدياق وخلال العرض. التفاعل عادة الذي ننظر إليه هو التفاعل بين الشرق والغرب. ماذا يحدث في هذه الأطر النظرية التي نحاول معالجتها حين يكون التفاعل بين حداثات وحضارات من الجنوب؟ وهنا يعني تذكرت أطروحة أسمة الحلبي من جامعة رايس، وهي بعنوان The Arab Rediscovery of India، وقد نشر مقالا مبنيا على أطروحته والتي وهو Empire and Arab Indology، ويضع النهضة في سياق العلاقات العربية الهندية. فهذه أيضا نقطة بحاجة لربما لفت النظر إليها. وهذا كمان أنتقل من هنا لأتكلم عن مفهوم المسلم ميديترينيان. لماذا تسميته بالمسلم ميديترينيان أولا؟ يعني لماذا هذا الإطار بهذه الصفة؟ هذه من ناحية. من ناحية أخرى لو أخذنا الشدياق مثلا لا يكفي إطار الميديترينيان. نعم. وبعدين نحن نتكلم عن ترانس امبيريال نتوركس. يعني سؤالي هو أين حدود المسلم في الميديترينيان وأين حدود الميديترينيان في الإطار التحليلي؟ شو بعد في لحظة. نقطة أخيرة عن موضوع المارجنز and marginality. طبعا هذه نقطة يعني ستكون بارزة في مشروع الكتاب بكل تأكيد. والسؤال يعني هي متعلقة أيضا بفكرة السنتر والبريفيري. يعني ما صفة هذه المارجيناليتي؟ من تسمينهم مارجينال؟ مبني على هوية دينية، هوية اجتماعية، موقف سياسي معين، وبنفس الوقت بما أنه هذا القرن 19 الطويل هو قرن الاضطرابات الكبيرة، لأي درجة كانت الهوية الهامشية يعني دائمة لأي فئة ننظر إليها في هذا السياق؟ وأيضا لأي درجة يبقى المهمش هامشي في إطار كل هذه القدرة على التنقل والقدرة على العضوية في شبكات متحركة بشكل كبير. هذه فقط خواطر على بعض ما ذكرتيه في المقدمة، وشكرا.
شكرا جزيلا دكتورة أمل على هذا التعقيب الثري. نفتح الباب للنقاش قبل العودة إلى الإجابات في حال كان لدى الزملاء أسئلة. فاتني في مقدمة هذا السيمنار أن أشكر أيضا برنامج التاريخ في معهد الدوحة الذي ساعدنا في تنظيم هذا السيمنار، فهو عمليا هو سيمنار في بالشراكة مع برنامج التاريخ. أعطي السؤال الدكتور. تفضل دكتور، يا ريت تعرف عن نفسك دكتور.
شكرا منصور نصاصر. أنا عندي سؤال دكتورة نادية، وأيضا يرتبط فيما ذكرته الدكتورة أمل بقضية الترانس إمبيريال نتوركس. يعني ماذا نعني بالترانس إمبيريال نتوركس؟ وهناك حالة في نهاية الإمبراطورية أن تطورت شبكة علاقات بين المدن وبين القرى، هناك سكك قطار، هناك حجاز ريلويز، يعني من الفرونتيرز في أقصى جنوب فلسطين كان ممكن نصل إلى الإمبراطورية ونصل إلى إسطنبول وإلى الحجاز. وهذا أيضا يحدثنا الدكتورة نادية عن تطور منظومة المدارس. شبكة منظومة المدارس هي منظومة مهمة جدا، ما يسمى The Imperial Schools. كيف تقرأي هذه الصورة من وجهة نظر الطلبة الذين درسوا على سبيل المثال في إسطنبول في ما يسمى المدارس The Imperial Schools في أنحاء الإمبراطورية؟ وماذا يعني بالمارجناليتي في هذا الحال إذا كانت المجموعات المهمشة هي من دافعت عن حدود الإمبراطورية في الجنوب وفي أماكن مختلفة على سبيل المثال؟ لأن هناك منظومات كثيرة من المهمشين الذين دافعوا عن حدود الإمبراطورية، خاصة عن طريق ما يسمى الشرطة، منظومة الشرطة العثمانية في نهاية الإمبراطورية. وشكرا.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور منصور. إذا لم يكن لدينا المزيد من الأسئلة أو التعليقات، أوكي نعود دكتور.
Yeah. Let me start with the last question, and then I come to the many of Dr. Amal. Indeed, the trans-imperial networks, what you refer to, education is absolutely a central point. And we'll have a whole chapter on the Qasemi family in Damascus. This will be a chapter written by Randy de Gilham, who deals precisely with that question. How in terms of the trans-imperial networks, there you have not only the personnel of people who are delivering education through newly founded schools, but trans-imperial networks indeed being the new forms of schools themselves, right? So this is trans-imperial in terms of institutional thinking, right? And this is something which we are taking on also. So we have a whole chapter which illustrates this very beautifully with the Qasemi family in Damascus, but I think we also see this in other contexts. Indeed, the trans-imperial, of course, this is a long century where we do see new kinds of connections. You refer to mobility in terms of what enables mobility, right? The railways and all of this. This is, of course, something. Thank you for making that point. We haven't actually taken that in as an aspect, but that certainly will have to be systematically be integrated, what difference it makes if you travel in individual itineraries and the moment that you have in that historical situation where it is facilitating trans-imperial connections, and where you have the emergence, right, of new kinds of passports and all of this. So these are very well taken points. Thank you for this. And with regard to, let me then start with the last point that you made, Amal. Where's why the Mediterranean and where's the end of the Mediterranean? This is actually a very good question. We've my own doctoral student, we told him, no, you can't be part of the book because he concentrates on Iran and Germany in the formation of the new man. We said that has no connection anymore with what we see as the imperial Mediterranean context. Why do we take the Mediterranean? We thought the Mediterranean really provides more than a geographical connection, but it had been a space in which a lot of exchange is taking place. Your critical, and I take this very well because I was also, as I was preparing for this talk, thinking, why actually are we calling it Muslim Mediterranean? Does this really make sense? Initially, the idea why we called it Muslim Mediterranean is that there's so much publication on the Mediterranean, also in recent years, which completely blends this out, right? So it was maybe a little bit too juvenile as a reaction to say we call it the Muslim Mediterranean to emphasize the strong Ottoman impact, the newly emerging centers that are developing, and these are all the capital cities, right? From if you think of Tunis, you think of Algiers, you think of Alexandria, etc., right? Which are also not exclusively Muslim cities, right, in terms of legal systems and what have you, under the Ottoman rule. This is why we thought it is a good point. But then my very own contribution is not about the Muslim, right, but it is within a context of it. So I do take your point. We are ourselves not entirely clear. It made the Muslim Mediterranean, initially the idea came from the focus on Abd al-Qadir. And Abd al-Qadir and his role that he played, all from coming from Algiers, and the important impact he had politically in that region. This is why we called it the Muslim. But I think also, as we see with the new chapter contributions, it is probably not suitable. So we will keep it out. But the Mediterranean, as a Mediterranean, we still want to keep in because it is indeed connecting also to the world outside, and it helps us, outside what is now the Arab East and North Africa, and it also helps us to bring in what was one of your comments before, why don't we bring in the South? How do we, this East-West fixation that we still have? We thought, but I take your point, that using the Mediterranean as space and political realm actually helps us getting out of thinking East and West, because that's not what we want to do. I don't know if you see that predominance being still there. So that is certainly not what we are intending, and the way in which connections, alone in the chapter, which I said was a trigger for this volume, which will not appear in the volume that you were reading, is where you see as well how India is present, right? How there is reception of different thinkers and writers indeed. So that point is certainly not one that is defining our approach to this, if it is our approach. I'm really speaking now here for myself. With regard to the question of how central or how important man for exile is, this is a question. For some people it is exile, but I think what we are also seeing and this is what I at least I like is this concept of decentering empire. That yes, you go places, you are active in places become central, and your point is very well taken. There is not a center and a periphery. It is centers and peripheries, and among the centers there is also a dynamic. Whether the notion of exile, except for if it is really a political caused exile, is a good one. I think that that these notions of dislocation, of mobility, and so allow us to connect better and move above the level of the biographical to see how the multitude of places and from where you act and from where you have impact or can have impact is defined by this displacements as a neutral term now. The exile is heavily loaded, right, and it is heavily also then connected to individual experience. So that is why I see, and also with regard to your man, whom we are going to introduce into this context, but I think for us per se, the term doesn't really work, except for the biographical. You want to come in, I see, no, on this? No.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, and what else did you have? I took you start. So I'm going from your back to the beginning of what you said. This question about modernity, right? That you asked.
That in the chapter itself, and I understand this is part of the larger project, of a larger project, but maybe it's in a different chapter, in a different context, but I felt the kind of lack of explicit reference to Tanzimat, explicit reference to the problematic of the modernity while analyzing Shudyak. Perhaps this can be brought forward a bit more.
But that is precisely what will be the chapter for the volume. Okay. That is dealing with this. This is precisely trying to bring in the structural questions there, namely of the changes that are there, but also the thinking of it. This chapter that you had has nothing to do with this, right? This is really intellectual history coming from a theological critique, and that turns into a direction where I would not, at least in that context, see the relevance of bringing in that kind of reform. That will be done, and this is why I want to participate when we're doing this book, right? To see we're there through the Tanzimat, through the imperial lens, we see something which I don't have on that level, and. Yeah, I see. This is the question of how to translate, what to do with the connotation of empire, right? That's a difficult thing to answer. How you empire has taken on different connotations, right? It's also in English. It's not a stable one, no. When you use it, whether you have, the resonance, of course, it is also always a question that you use, whether you have been subjected to modes of imperial dominance, is the language in which you write, or whether it is actually within a language that is exercising imperial might. I think also lots of the connotation, unconsciously or consciously, are in here. So for decentering empire, I think it takes on a direction. I can see your point there. It takes on a direction that discloses, that hides certain elements of what you described. It would disturbs you in the term of using it, if I understood you correctly. Huh? In Arabic, yeah. But the English in the English one, I think it works absolutely. But the question is precisely why doesn't it work in Arabic, right? And this is, I think, has something to do with historical experience, no?
I think it has to do more, it has to do more, what I'm saying is for those who read about empire in English, there's so much critical scholarship towards empire that the moment you mention empire, you're mentioning a very critical question. But the same word, in my opinion, when you say it in Arabic, الإمبراطورية, doesn't elicit the same reaction. Because there's no, I think there's no, at least enough engagement in Arabic in the phenomenon, in the concept, in the workings of empire, to the extent that my immediate reaction is like, no, it can't be إمبراطورية, it has to be something else. Just to be right.
واضح. اسمحوا لي بس ناخذ تدخل من الدكتور عزيز فاطمة.
بس سؤال يعني بسيط ولكن له أبعاد، ممكن أبعاد تحليلية يعني. والسؤال يتناول الأمير عبد القادر الجزائري. سؤالي هو هل ينتمي عبد القادر الجزائري، وهذا يعني لهذا الموضوع رابط مع قضية التنظيمات التي أثيرت، هل ينتمي عبد القادر إلى زمن التنظيمات أم ينتمي إلى زمن أسبق؟ بمعنى هل يمكن أن نصنف نشاط وأفكار وحركة عبد القادر الجزائري في سياق تنظيماتي أم في سياق انتفاضات كانتفاضة المهدي في السودان أو دان فوديو في غرب أفريقيا؟ وهل ثمة مفارقة زمانية أناكرونيزم يعني تحكم الكثير من الكلام المتداول عن عبد القادر الجزائري؟
شكرا دكتور عزيز. دكتورة.
Yes, I mean, this should be really answered better by, we have 4 chapters on Abdul Qadir, right? And it is precisely the question where to locate him. So he is not put there positively as there. The first chapter is precisely on locating him, precisely where he belongs, because of what you say and of the ways and the lens through which we see him. So that point is very well taken. So this is not to try to place this now under this umbrella, but what we see, and this is what then biography does, and the biographical approach does allow us also to see where we have overlaps of political systems, right? Where we have certain motivations that we would define, especially with Abdul Qadir, what his revolts, etc. are. But it is this is why decentering it may take us out, or it does take us out. This is what I mean. I know what the chapters are about, right? It does take us out precisely of these clean-cut historiographic descriptions. Absolutely so. But still, we need one title to capture this all. This is why we keep that frame. But yes, no, we have 4 chapters only on him. These are my North Africa. Yeah, we have 4. So yes.
I want to go back to the Mediterranean issue and why I'm still not easy with it. I think it has to do with the legacy of the way the term has been used. That it's kind of, it's as if it's a Eurocentric at some point point of reference, or at least the way it is not by itself. But I think the way the Mediterranean was used as an analytical space, it centered Europe more than we would like to. There is that. But the other point is, I think, even if we take Shudyak as an example, this is the example now I know very well in this book, it's beyond the Mediterranean. So I find the Mediterranean to be limiting for what you want to do here. But also you need to keep in mind the luggage. The luggage of using, you know, you look at the title, you see the Mediterranean, and something triggers.
Yeah, we'll have to keep this in mind, because the intention is exactly the opposite of what you say. We thought by calling it even the Muslim Mediterranean, but I think Muslim will disappear for the reasons we've just mentioned. Calling it the Mediterranean is precisely to recapture it and to make it not a European concept. That the Mediterranean space is as much the North African, Mashriqi, Arab East.
Certainly.
So this is why, by using it and placing there, yes, some people, it is still the Mediterranean, right? So there is still a movement to France and whatever is there for some of our protagonists we are dealing with. But I mean, this using this as the bounding space is simply defined for us, and this also goes to the north, by the Ottoman Empire, right, which has also the northern part. So one of our contributions by Dr. Esmer, for instance, on the bandits from the Balkans and Istanbul is covering that part of the Mediterranean as well. So for us, what we thought, but of course, if it resonates differently, thank you for saying this, we thought it is a recopulation of that term in a way that takes it away, because you are right, the Mediterranean has very often been seen from the Nordic perspective down to the south, right? And in a volume in which I just contributed now 12 port cities around the Mediterranean, I did the Beirut one, and it covers the whole Mediterranean ones around, but most of them are the Nordic cities and very few. So there's Beirut and Tunis and Bobes. No, so but dropping the notion is it would be sad, no, because it loses then something, I think, of the might that the imperial context has, and as we are decentering it, that it is this vast geographical and cultural political space. So I would feel uneasy to drop it. You are right. The question is, how far do we go? I mean, is Damascus the Mediterranean, right? We have a whole chapter. The colleague asked about the institution of education, and that is Damascus. What has this to do with the Mediterranean? We have a generous understanding, and in that sense, it's really still the Brodel notion, in this that you can go very deep down. For Brodel, it's up to Brest, right? Even the Mediterranean. So.
طيب كلمات أخيرة دكتورة، كلمة أخيرة لك قبل أن نختم.
I just wanted to say that, as you mentioned, there has been a lot on trans-imperial networks or trans-regional networks, and we just need to find a way that when we use now Mediterranean, we want to make sure that the readers, maybe in a subtitle, are aware that we're in the trans-imperial networks stage of analysis now.
No, I take your point.
Yeah, we moved from something regional to trans-regional, and anyway, we'll talk about this.
طيب. شكرا جزيلا دكتورة نادية البغدادي على هذا السيمنار، وشكرا جزيلا دكتورة أمل على التعقيب. سعدت بإدارة هذا الحوار الفكري التاريخي. أرغب أيضا بالتذكير بأن جميع سيمينارات المركز العربي تنشر تباعا على اليوتيوب، فهذا النقاش يعني مسجل ويعني يمكن العودة إليه في أي وقت. شكر خاص خصوصا لمن بقي ولمن غادر أيضا، لكن التجديد على من بقي.